Hey, thanks for checking out Nuts and Bolts with Tone. Today we're going to talk about turbo removal. I got a 2012 3.0 liter Sprinter, Mercedes Sprinter diesel, and I'm going to be removing the turbo, and I'm going to tell you all about how to do it. Let's get it. Okay, so I will show you what this looks like before I took it apart, after I put it back together. However, this is the best time to see it because this is actually how you see how it goes together and how to replace it. So, the exhaust manifolds come around from each side and it's a flex tube right there. It's got a little bit of flex to it. I don't know if you can see that moving, but it has a little bit of flex to it. All right, that's on both sides. Right there, 3 bolts, 3 bolts. All right, so the gasket clips onto the exhaust manifold. It's got 3 clips on it, on each side, and they're both different. One does not fit on the other. You got this tube right here. This is an EGR tube. So this connects to the turbo pedestal, and it goes down, up, and under to the EGR cooler. And here's the down pipe. So this is a 2012. I believe the older models, they don't disconnect. So this one here disconnects. You don't see the outlet flange. But I believe the older ones, they don't disconnect there. So the outlet flange is still connected and it's in the way and it's a pain in the butt. Here is the turbo where it mounts to the block. So this is where the oil passes through. Okay, you don't need to take this off unless it was leaking. This has 3 bolts. If you have to take it off, it's got a squarish gasket with a whole bunch of holes in it. This gasket here, down here, that is for this mounting plate for the turbo. So, the way you're gonna go about doing this is you're gonna go down, you're gonna find this tube, and you're gonna come from the front underneath, and you're gonna need a long extension, and you're gonna loosen up the 2 bolts for that tube right here. It's gonna be 2 E-Torques, and you're gonna loosen those up. You don't wanna take them out because then it's a pain to get it started. And then you have to fish the gasket out and all that. So leave it connected, just loosen the bolts all the way. Then there's gonna be 1 bolt that mounts to the back of the engine that holds it up. Then there's going to be this little bracket right here, and this mounts to the turbo pedestal, and I'll show you when we get down there. So you're gonna have 2 brackets that bolt up this. There's one right there, and the other one is down below. Those hold it in place. Take those out, loosen up the bottom 2 bolts, and then take these top 2 bolts out. All right. Then you're going to, and I'm going to show you on the turbo. Then you're going to undo the 3 bolts on the back of the turbo for the outlet flange, and then you're going to take off the clamp, and you're going to take the outlet flange off, and it's going to be out of your way. All right. The only thing that you're not going to see is this is missing the bracket and the bolts. The only thing you're not going to see in this is, let's see if I can see it. No, that's there. Trying to see. So normally, let's see. Okay, so normally that hole right there and that hole right there is a bracket, and the bracket comes up and it will bolt up to the back of the turbo. This one doesn't have it, so you don't have to mess with it. So we don't have the 2 bolts that go kind of sideways but kind of upside down. I'll show that to you in just a minute. Okay, so now that we've seen what it looks like, now we're going to talk about the other things that you don't see. So here's the connector, okay? The best thing to do is after you've taken all the exhaust off, the outlet flange, you've taken all this stuff off the back, then you take the 2 bolts out here, and those are 2 Torx bolts. You're going to take those out, and then you can lift the turbo up. Once you lift the turbo up, you can take the connector off. The connector is up against this wiring harness here when it's in the car, so you can't really get the connector off without taking a bunch of stuff off. On this 2012, the other thing that you have is you're going to have a temp sensor, and that temp sensor goes right here, and the connector is on the temp sensor. Okay, so all you have to do is pull this shield up right here to access this connector to disconnect that. All right, so now let's go down below and let's talk about the other stuff. Okay, so here is the turbo. And it sits in the car like this. Okay, so this spot right here. So this right here is where your air intake comes from, right here. So your air intake comes off there. That's your air intake. Okay, the other thing that you're gonna have is this right here, this aluminum tube connected to the resonator. All right. So this right here is where this connects. Okay, it's got a green O-ring in there. This is the turbo pedestal, and it looks like this. Okay, so there's a mounting gasket on the back here, and that's where it mounts to the back of the turbo, which is right there. It's right there. So that's where the pedestal mounts. Okay, when you get a new turbo, it's not going to come with this pedestal, so you have to take this off. Okay, so there's a gasket here. You're going to have to take that off. So now we have the turbo pedestal, and this is what it looks like. Okay, so that's where it mounts to the turbo. This is where it mounts to each exhaust manifold. Right there, each exhaust manifold. This is where the EGR tube connects. Okay, this has 2 Torx, and there's a little metal gasket that goes here. All right, gasket each there, gasket each there, gasket there. Here's where the outlet flange bolts up to, right there. Let's look at the back of this thing. Here's where the outlet flange goes. Here's what the outlet flange looks like on this 2012. That's where it goes to the downpipe. That's what it looks like there. Okay. The bottom bolt, it has that. So you can start the bolt and set it on there and put it in. Okay. So we got 3 bolts there, and that holds that up. Now this is what I was talking about, where if it had that bracket, that it would go. Okay, these bolts are actually not straight. They actually angle downward. So make sure you get that angle right, or you'll round off the heads if your bracket is there. Put this thing around. Here's where the electrical connector goes, right there. Let's see, here is where your 2 Torx go, right down there, that hole and that hole. Let's look at that from underneath so we can understand this thing. So there it is right there. That's how the oil passes through and drains back from the turbo. The other thing to mention is on this one here, we have this temp sensor. Now this temp sensor, once it's in the car, it's kind of hard to remove. So what I did is I made a mark right here. And basically that mark shows me where in line this temp sensor was before I disconnected it. So that way I can take the new one, I can put a reference mark similar to this one, and I can tighten it down. And that way I can put this in the turbo before I put it in the car. And all I have to do is connect the connector. So that is that. Now, there's the outlet flange, the air box there. I'll explain how to take that off when I put it back together. So here is the resonator. And this thing goes like this. Okay, it's going to go in here, into this aluminum pipe. And it has an O-ring here. Replace this seal if you remove this. It also has another seal there. This one's a big, fat, like, flat type of donut. I'll show you what that looks like when I get the new one. And then there's that seal. There is a bolt right there. And 2 bolts right there that hold this thing on. Then there's a Torx right here and a clip that slides in, and I'll show you that. So this thing here, it's best if you can walk this whole thing out because you don't want to disrupt that tube down there, because if you disrupt that tube, then you got brackets to get into. The bottom bolt that holds it up to the engine is really hard to get to. I try not to mess with this if I can help it. Lube these things up. I mean, lube them up before you put them in, because you don't want them to tear, because then you'll have a boost leak. And that'll be a fat boost leak, that'll be a loss of power, and a check engine light. Don't forget the green O-ring that goes in here. And I'll show you the rest of that when we get it back together. This is the resonator, by the way, an intake air resonator. Okay, so here we are going back together. I've got the connector connected for the turbo right down here. I've got the connector connected for the temp sensor right here. Now what you want to do is you want to get the 2 bolts down there. You want to get your 2 Torx down there. There's one on both sides. You want to get those in. You want to get them started. And then what you want to do is you want to run them down most of the way until you have about this right here. See that wiggle? Okay, so that wiggle, what you want is that wiggle, because remember those pipes at the back on the exhaust manifold that connect to the pedestal? Well, those flanges are on a flex, so they have a little bit of movement. Well, with that little bit of movement and then this little bit of movement, you have an easier way of connecting all the bolts for back there. So I started one on one side. I tried to start one on the other side, but I don't know if it's straight. So I'm gonna redo it and double check. But basically, get all 6 pedestal bolts to the exhaust manifolds. Get them all in, get them all most of the way down. And then you wanna torque your turbo down and then torque those down. So that's a little tech tip here. Remember, about that much wiggle. That's it. You want to run them down till they're snug by hand, then back them off just a little bit. Okay, so here's another tip. Okay, so and this happened to me. So you can see. So you see the length of the bolts? Okay, so these three are for the outlet tube to go to the back of the turbo. They're shorter. If you use these, the outlet tube will not fasten all the way and you will have an exhaust leak. How do I know that? I did that before. Yeah. Okay, so don't make that mistake. Shorter bolts, outlet tube, 6 longer bolts, exhaust manifold, pedestal connection. Okay, all right, so now we got the pedestal all bolted in. It's all tight, all snug, everything's beautiful. Now we're gonna connect the EGR tube right there. That guy, we're gonna get it loosely connected, and then we're gonna make sure that that clamp right there lines up before we torque it down. And then all the other bolts are started. So we're gonna get that all started, get it all snugged up. We're gonna tighten this and then work our way down. All right, so here's my outlet flange right here. Don't forget to start your bolt on the bottom so it's easier to slide in. Gonna clean this up, got a new gasket on the back. Gonna do some emery cloth on this, make sure this is all good, and throw a clamp on here, and then the turbo will be in, and we just have to connect the charge air system, and I'll show you that. All right, so here's the 3 O-rings you're gonna need to connect that charge air side. So this is for the resonator here. Turn my light on here. So this is for the resonator. Okay, these seals are really, really important. All 3 of these seals, don't reuse them. Get new ones. This is the hot side of the turbo. It will leak. You will have a boost leak. You will have a low power. You will have a check engine light. Very important. Okay, so here's the back side of the resonator. You got the resonator right here. You got 2 bolts right there, bolting up to the resonator. You got this clip that goes through the aluminum charge pipe, a Torx that goes here, and then behind over here is another E-Torx that bolts this resonator up to the engine. On this side you have that aluminum pipe that comes around and it elbows up and it goes to the resonator. So you got to make sure you lube all those seals and they just roll together, and it rolls all in together. Just keep an eye on the bottom one at the turbo, that green O-ring. If you don't get it just right, it likes to tweak on you and tear. So be careful for that. And thanks for watching the video. Check me out on Instagram at Nuts and Bolts with Tone. Watch my daily activities as a mechanic, gas, diesel, funny stuff, you know, you got it. Hit the like button if you like this video. Hit the subscribe button, hit the bell. You'll get notified of all of my future content. See you next time.